Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you tuning in because today we are talking about independent college consultants. What exactly is that? What is their role and how do they help our students? We're going to explore who might benefit from hiring an independent consultant and the specific needs of students with learning and thinking differences such as dyslexia and ADHD. Joining me today is Matthew Hayutin, the founder and partner at Hayutin Education. Matthew began his career as a classroom teacher and private educational therapist, working with students of all ages and learning profiles. He has extensive experience as a college consultant and homeschool teacher, and he's here with us today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Matthew. Welcome.
Hi, Karen. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It is so great to have you here. We were saying, before we hit record that I've had a number of people from Hayutin Education on the podcast, and Hunja actually joined us for our college transition summit. So
that's right.
But this is your first time here, so welcome.
Yes, I've been in the background and supportive of all my teammates, but as I said, I was getting a little bit jealous for my moment in the spotlight.
Well, you're
so
here now.
Yeah, as an avid listener, this is a big day for me. So thanks again.
Thank you. We are recording this during the summer, and this is a time for some high school students to begin thinking about college and the application process. And I, had been talking to you and your team about college consultants and the work that they do. And I think it's important because the whole process of thinking about colleges and the application process can be really daunting and stressful for a number of families. And I know this is some of the work that you do. And I wanted to be able to have this discussion because some families look into hiring an independent college consultant to kind of help them with the process. I don't even know what that is, because when I was applying to universities, I don't know if it existed. Maybe it did, and I just didn't take advantage of that opportunity. But for many families, they may also not know what an independent college consultant is. I think that's a great place to start in terms of what exactly is that.
That's a great point. And there can be so many differences in how they engage with families, what sort of resource they can provide. And just to date myself, since you mentioned not knowing what one was in your era, I did my applications on a typewriter, and there wasn't something called the internet around just to give everybody a sense of where I came into this. So it's been fun to support people as one through the digital era. And I think there are a lot of questions about why would one need to engage and what would be the pros and cons of that. So let's start with that. And I know some questions might come up about the when, but let's start with that why. And to think of it as such an individual family decision, I think there can be a number of reasons why when I talk to moms and dads and colleagues about why they might call someone. And I think one of the main reasons might be the kind of school a student's at and how that experience is rolling out for, say, someone heading into the junior or senior year. So what if we start with a really large public school, since so many of us have students at public schools, or we ourselves were at public schools, where we might have had a counselor that was assigned to maybe 500 students or so, let's just say. And they might be excellent, these folks. But in terms of those connection points with an individual student, they might be a little more few and far between. They might have a harder time with bandwidth, not skill set, but just getting to know someone and helping them to arrive at what is a well-balanced list of schools that are well-researched, vetted, and a good interpersonal and academic and social match in all those senses of the word. We'll talk more about match later. And I think that can be hard sometimes. So that's one sort of maybe bucket or category to think about of why you might need a little extra touch why having someone who could really work individually with a student and really get to know them and navigate that process a bit more personally and routinely with more touch points might be of value. That would be one sort of category. I guess another one could be, let's say you have a great college counselor in-house at your school. Maybe it's even a parochial or independent day school or a boarding school. But let's say in the summer, that particular model is that those folks don't, understandably, for good reason, work in the summer. That might be absolutely fine throughout the process. But let's say you're a rising senior with a really busy fall, and maybe you really want to get going, whether it's on the Common Application or something like a UC application. Since we're here in California, a lot of students turn to the UCs. A lot of work can happen in the summer months to sort of build momentum, create a runway so that the fall of the senior year begins with a little more work banked. There are many counselors who just can't do that because they're off for the summer, right? That's not all schools, Karen, but there are many for which that's the model, right? And a side example would be, what if you have, say, someone in the arts? Maybe it's performing arts, visual arts, some sort of related field where there's also an additional portfolio to develop. Now you're sort of talking about an extra layer of submissions, and having some of that work front-loaded in the summer can be really attractive. So that's another reason why some folks might hire someone like myself or a colleague just to get going and just get that process going. So that's an example. I think there might be a third category, which is maybe happens less often, Karen, which would be someone who just doesn't hit it off with their in-house assigned counselor. For whatever reason, the chemistry is not there. They're feeling deflated or defeated, not seen. I don't think that happens nearly as often, but there are times when a family will call and say, maybe you, Matthew, or someone like you who's a neutral party, just there for us, not in any way connected with our ecosystem at school, could be that extra voice or that extra cheerleader or mentor. Those are some of the biggest reasons, and I still think there's a vital role that in-house school counselors always play. They are the ones speaking to schools about you. If any independent college consultant speaking out on your behalf, run the other way, right? That's not an ethical role. So we have to remember that politically and logistically, in-house counselors remain key quarterbacks and collaborators. So I didn't want to suggest otherwise.
That's a really good point in terms of knowing the student and, staying at what my kids would say, staying in your lane, right? In terms of what you can contribute.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true. There might be one other moment or an intersection between parent, child, school, and perhaps someone private and independent. And that could be sometimes that the research can get a little heavy to do the digging and what constitutes a match. How do we figure that out? There are some people who are really good at that and can really drill in with a student and sort of bring that level of knowledge to the table, but also help with process, because some parents can be great at this and they can really enjoy the process with their students, sit at that kitchen or dining room table and just knock it out and really celebrate that process and that student. Whereas some other families say, we're starting to clash a lot here. We're not really enjoying this process and we're spending a lot more time squabbling. The house is getting really tense. We'd rather spend some of this time together as a family in other ways. And if they have the luxury of, some time and treasure spent differently, sometimes that feels really good as well. Sometimes. Not always, right? I think it's important to say that. And where someone might need some help along the way could look really different in 9th or 10th grade than it might, say, for a junior or a senior.
Right. And I think you've done a really great job of outlining the why. Why would someone seek out an independent college consultant? And it sounds like, one is access and availability, particularly if you're needing support over the summer. Maybe even, an expertise or a skill set and bandwidth. If a school counselor, for example, has, 500 students, like you were saying, that they have to support, you may need some individual attention and support, and then seeking an independent college consultant might be helpful in that regard as well. So, when someone is hearing an independent college consultant, and you talked a little bit about how that might be different than a school counselor in terms of their role, and there also sounds like there might be a little bit of overlap. What exactly is the role of an independent college consultant? Is it to help the student decide on whether or not they want to go to college? Is it to help them find the right college? Is it all of the above? Talk a little bit about kind of the role. What would that person be doing? It sounds like it might differ for student to student.
It might be. And I love that you asked that question, because what a perfect question to ask a potential, someone you might hire.
Yes.
Where does this begin and end? What are the boundaries here? What could we expect from you? And some people call themselves IECs, like an independent educational consultant. Some people call themselves college consultants or counselors. And so when you start adding more verbiage, you start to wonder, are there differences? Are there differences in your accreditation, right? In your professional development, in your ethics? Are you part of a board? Where does this go? I'd say that one of the biggest challenges for families is to develop a well-balanced list, meaning one that has some good likelihood. It might have some schools that some people used to call targets, or words like reaches or stretches, or some people use words like safety or more likely. There's different language for that, but I think the through line, Karen, should be that anyone who's really strong in this arena can help students evolve a list that includes some really wonderful schools that would probably accept them open-armed, where they'd really thrive, and also some that they might have a less likely chance for, but really want to give it a go for. And I think that research process and that vetting is not nothing. So I'd say that's a big part of it. But I do think also, to reframe this in one way, my passion is in this arena is to help people find a place where they can really contribute and be active citizens, and find their people. And I think that so many of us, through what we consume in media and what we hear, whether it's on the yard or at a coffee or in media, we think about where kids can get in. And I don't know, as a culture or even as individuals, if we spend enough time thinking about where we can fit in. And I think that's, if we could reframe it that way, it can really help a lot of families, because that's where the hidden time could come in, Karen. Anyone can look at a GPA or some scores and look at some indices, and with the internet, you can pretty quickly figure out, not if you're getting in, that's not what I'm saying, but a likelihood or lack thereof is pretty easy to arrive at. But what about the likelihood that you would enjoy it there? And we got to hang out with these folks for a few years. So we want to do our homework on who's in that community, and again, how could I make my place and be connected to others? And I think that is the mark of someone who's really good at this work, is helping that process out, so that we don't ideally have someone transferring quickly or stepping away from school because they had such a rough match. It's already hard, I think, this transition. So I think that's a fun area to think about. And another one would be a passion of yours and mine, I know, is the whole space of executive functioning and engendering those skills. And what a wonderful crucible this could be to build some of those muscles. We can talk, I know, with you and me about how that could be, but that's sort of the secret agenda a lot of us have, for whom executive function, skill building is like a cornerstone effort or service or goal. How would that relate? Because I think anyone who's really good in this space would also, be spending a lot of energy on building those muscles and not doing it for the kid, right? Or the young adult.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that, the goal is not just to get in, and shouldn't be just to get in, because ultimately the goal is to graduate, right? And to thrive while you're there. And so again, when you talk about the executive functioning skills, we want to make sure that they match the college environment that they're going to be entering. And then also making sure it's a good match in terms of being an environment where that student will have the opportunity to thrive, enjoy the experience, and to graduate.
That's actually, I love that you said that. And that discovery process can be so exciting. But how do we get folks on the right road, and how to think about what variables, what ingredients for this recipe really matter to a given student? And it might be really different from one to another. For example, some students we have the honor of working with really care a lot about diversity in every sense of the word, in terms of inclusion and belonging. It's a really important part. So they're looking at all forms of diversity, right, and equity. Other students, they might really care a lot about something like the Greek system, and if it's got too large or too small of a presence on the campus. Some folks really want access to the city, right, with a capital C. Others are really enamored of aesthetics and beauty and outdoor space, right? These are variables. Some kids really worry about size a lot, and they should. You might have a student who goes to a really small 712, let's say. And so let's say a young lady says, it feels like such a fishbowl. I really think I need a much larger pool to swim in. Sounds good. I hear that. So what is large or medium or gigantic to, say, Karen Wilson or Matthew Hayutin or anybody else? Has to be unpacked a bit. Are we talking about 30,000, 20, 7,000? And how do you operationally ask questions to make that more real to someone who's 17, 18 years old, perhaps? What if I asked you, Karen, would you be okay if the teachers didn't know your first name? And you might say that's absolutely fine. Or you might pause and say, I don't know about that. And that might not be true in upper division courses at a large school, but in those initial, more tender years, that could be a factor. And so there are ways to get at questions. And there's a lot of great questionnaires and resources I could share with you for families to utilize themselves to get underneath some of that and make sure that they're unpacking these questions and kind of speaking the same language.
Right. And it sounds like those questions and asking those questions is part of the process of working with an independent consultant, because you really want to know the student, and so that you can help them kind of understand their options and then make informed decisions about the next step in their transition from high school to a university, college, or an alternative.
Right. And there's, of course, the junior college route, which is so vital for so many. It's been such a great way for some folks to build muscle, have some optionality. It's almost like a passport forward to also save some funds to be able to work or intern or do some other things, maybe not be in school full time. It's also a great option for folks who maybe don't love their choices when they're through with the process. Many will go that route happily. And it's just a wonderful way forward. So I don't think there's one direct path. There's also, of course, the gap year movement, which has taken on so much excellent steam. I think the idea of taking a gap or a post-grad year, depending on how you define it, really was stigmatized a while back. Maybe in your and my day, that wasn't something that a lot of people understood. There was fear around it. Whereas now, a lot of admissions folks across the table at colleges and universities really look closely at students who have taken advantage of something like that. There's been a lot of adulting that can happen that way. Perhaps it was work immersion or cultural, or perhaps it was volunteerism. Maybe it was additional coursework. There are a lot of ways students can take a breath, and especially in this sort of post-pandemic era, that's become highly attractive to a lot of students. And some students even do what's called defer, which isn't available everywhere, but many, it's become quite in vogue, Karen, to apply, be admitted, and then in that window of time before it's time to put down that deposit, to sometimes defer, hold a space, and then return to that same space, that same school a year later, which is really interesting. We didn't used to see as much of that as we do now at a larger scale.
And it seems that there are a lot of options for students to consider beyond just the application process, because then you still have to make decisions once you start getting those acceptance letters, and then making another decision about what you want to do. Where do you want to go? Do you want to defer your admission? And then what would you do during that time? And it's really interesting that you mentioned the gap year, because the episode before this one is about gap year. So I'm glad that these two are going to be sandwiched beside each other. In terms of working with an independent college consultant, is it and can it be particularly helpful for students with learning differences, such as dyslexia and ADHD, who may be looking for a specialized environment or an environment that supports the way that they learn and think?
Absolutely. I think that's moving into sort of a niche space of what can we expect by way of accommodation. Is our assessment up to date? do we need more than, say, some of those conventional accommodations like extended time or access to a writing center? Just how much support is there? And digging into that is important. There are some folks like myself who are specialists in that arena who really know those schools and what's offered and what isn't. That's a really important element, I think, in finding a match. And I think, too, there's also this movement around early action, which is the non-binding version, or what we hear about as rolling. But this early decision trend has been really interesting, Karen. It's really creeping up in terms of the number of students being admitted early decision and wanting to kind of pull that lever, meaning it's binding and you're going. And when I think about the why behind that, I just want to raise the possibility that some students might be a little fast to pull that lever sometimes. I don't know if I want to say impulsive, but they want to know where they're going. They want this behind them in the rear view. Totally understandable, human. They want to go back to being seniors. So if they can find out in December where they're going, rather than perhaps waiting all the way into March and even deeper April in many cases, that's attractive. But how many of them know themselves well enough and have done the work to comfortably commit, let go of other options, and go all in? I think it's a big ask, especially for someone who's evolving so rapidly, like a senior. We think how much our children can change and our young adults can change in any given year, especially a year like that. It's not that I'm against, in any way, ED, as they call it for short. But I do wonder sometimes how many kids might feel pressured, and I don't just mean by parents, but just sort of in the ether of their own ecosystem to do that, perhaps prematurely. So I just wanted to raise that because it's not just getting in, it's going there and finding your way. And I think some of the most important classes we take are being freshmen and being on our own and making new friends. Those aren't classes for which we get credit, but they often determine a huge trajectory forward for ourselves and our experience at a school. Because if we don't have a good first year, it can be a really tender time.
Right. I mean, there's so much support that's provided in this realm when I'm thinking about all the things you're saying about an independent college consultant and looking at the process and the role of an independent college consultant in supporting a student. It sounds like from making the decision about whether you want to go to college or university, all the way through receiving acceptances and trying to decide, what do you do with that early admission decision? What do you do about maybe taking a gap year? What do you do about deferring admission? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And it sounds like, you really have to tailor the work that you do to each student's unique needs and strengths. And that's one of the advantages, it seems, of working with the college consultant, because you really have an opportunity to get to know that student and their needs and their wants and their desires in a way that maybe a student wouldn't have that type of experience with someone who's working with hundreds and hundreds of students.
Right. And some folks want to engage with someone because of that journey and those different chapters. They might want to start earlier. But why would you? Let's talk about that just for a moment. Some of these smaller moments. If we were to back up the clock, we've talked a lot about perhaps what a senior goes through, right? Or a late spring junior. But what if we go all the way back towards, say, a ninth grader? There's so much research around what happens when you have a mentor. Some folks like to knock on someone's door like mine and say, hey, we just had some thoughts about course selection for the next couple of years, or summer thoughts, or a discussion about the role of extracurricular life or balance. Some families just want a little a la carte support like that along the way. They're also possibly developing a relationship with someone like myself to see if that person's a good fit when the stakes are a bit higher and there's more work to be done. But just for value add, they really just want to pick someone's brain and then go back to the current of their life again. So I think that can be helpful too, to think about, say, activity in summer and, optics. Some folks get a little worried about doing too much or not enough or how it all looks. And sometimes it can be really assuring to hear that they're actually doing wonderful work and to sort of ease back into that process. That's another fun time to talk. And I think the research piece is another one. How can you possibly, not just from an equity standpoint, but even logistically, visit enough schools. There are so many great tours online now. There's a lot more research. Back in the day, you used to order maybe an academic handbook would come in the mail, maybe with lots of stamps on it. Most of those aren't even printed anymore. It's all online, but someone has to help you navigate that and become a better researcher and find ways to, whether it's through Google Docs or list building, to start to research and hold on to some of those ingredients and pieces. That's another part I think that a lot of counselors can help with. And think about, where would you visit with your limited time and treasure? And what could you infer from those visits to better know yourself and where you might best contribute and fit in? I think that's another important part.
Right. And are there best practices? So families who are considering working with an independent college consultant, are there things that they should look for when determining whether or not this person is a good match for their family?
Yes, I think it's really important to ask questions about process and how much access you'll have to the person and at what frequency, because you might hear a figure about someone perhaps billing at what they might call a package level, maybe an A to Z package. Other people, it might be a package of sessions that are finite. Others might do it on an hourly level. So I think starting with some of those housekeeping logistics is really smart, Karen. So you know what you're getting and you know where that begins and ends. For example, some college consultants, you're really borrowing their brain just for the list to make sure it's well balanced, but they're not necessarily holding hands with the student on what we might call the process of clicking and dragging through apps, ensuring that they really sing and that it's just the student's voice and no one else's, that the app is ready to go. That's a different kind of level of support. And some consultants don't wear that hat. And others get much more involved in sort of the nitty-gritty, or what we might call the process, where others might talk more almost from a knowledge-based consulting, just about schools, lists, research. So that's an interesting topic as well to ask about. And what can you expect in terms of feedback? Because if you're a parent and this is a one-to-one relationship largely, what's the parent role? Are there some family meetings initially, and then do parents step back? And if so, how are they kept in the loop? Those are some good questions, I think, to ask as well. And timeline, for how long are we engaged for?
Right.
Just to set the table, on those expectations.
And then I know that you and your team work with students who have learning differences. I think that's an important question for parents who have neurodivergent students to ask as well. Have you worked with students with dyslexia, with ADHD, with autism? And, getting that information can be really important as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes that extra layer of research where someone might be studying sports teams to see if their student can play at a school, or someone else from a neurodivergent population really wants to know what's happening on the ground and on the daily. What's the advising look like? Class size is going to matter a lot. Is there an actual learning center and who's there? And I think even at course selection, particularly in, again, that more vulnerable first year, I love when consultants and counselors work with families to actually dig into, once admitted and once committed, even though they get great advising, let's look at that trajectory. Let's look at those classes and you, the student, you, the learner, and where you are. What are you going to need? Do you have an ed therapist already? And is that person sort of coming with you in the ether? Do you need to drive new relationships with someone on the ground because you need to work face-to-face, understandably? And I think having some conversations like that is really important. And some folks with neurodivergent kids will find that sometimes there's a secondary application process for a more robust learning center within a school. In other words, you're applying to the school. Maybe it's the liberal arts school, but you're also applying to this secondary school within, like a learning center, or a place that just sort of doles out more robust accommodations. That can be a really great way to go. And to have really open and honest conversations with that in-house counselor or dean about where they see the student being ready to go next. I think having some really frank, transparent dialogue there is so important, Karen, about how they see their student that they've known for so long, and where the students with similar profiles go and where they thrive or where they don't. I think that's going to be really important as well.
That is. And it sounds like just working with an independent college consultant is really a valuable investment for many families who are trying to navigate this process with their child, with their teen. And it sounds like the work that you do, and this is what I love about Hayutin, is that you not only provide this level of support. I mean, you provide support from elementary school all the way through college, but if students need support once they are admitted into the university, you also can provide educational therapy and support for particularly the executive functioning issues that often, reemerge, at the university level in a different way.
So true. Yeah, we love helping to build that bridge. And, sometimes that scaffolding is important for a first year and maybe not thereafter, which is always a great outcome. And also to help students figure out what they can avail themselves of over there. They've often had their team at the high school level. How are they going to rebuild that team? So you're right, Karen. Sometimes having some support from a place like Hayutin or another colleague can be at least that bridge as they build new connections and find their next set of people, and avail themselves of that rather than just default to who they know and not stretch. I think it's more of an and than it is an or. Right. I completely agree. And I mean, this information has been so helpful, and I know it's going to help a lot of families. And I can't thank you enough for joining us. And like I said to you initially, I can't believe it's been this long and you haven't been on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure, and I'll be happy to come back on another topic. And I'm definitely going to have you back. But if listeners want to learn more about Hayutin Education, the support that you provide students, again, like I was saying, from elementary school all the way through college, what is the best way for them to connect with you and your team? Appreciate that so much. They always call. If they're old school like me, they can pick up the phone. And that number is 310-829-7505. I think we're near 26 now, by the way, Karen, which is wild. How about that? Wow. So it's been a minute, and we still love the work, so that they can certainly call, or they can visit us on our website at hayutineducation.com. And they can use our web inquiry if they're up later at night and they just want to ask a few questions and not talk to someone. Maybe they're introverts or just really busy professionals and they just want to get a little info. They can certainly visit our website, and there's an inquiry there as well. Wonderful. And I encourage people to connect because, again, there's a lot of great services provided at Hayutin, including what we've talked about today, if you're looking for a college consultant. So thank you again, Matthew. Thank you, Karen. Thank you again for joining us. For our listeners who want to learn more about Matthew Hayutin and Hayutin Education, we will include links in the show notes, so be sure to check them out. And be sure to check out our website, childnexus.com. There you can join our email list, you can book a consultation, or you can sign up for one of our mini courses if you want to have more information about how to support your child who has dyslexia, ADHD, or is struggling with anxiety. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.